We just finished up the first part of building our header. Before we go in and start styling it and making sure everything is positioned correctly, I think it makes sense to take care of a pretty common task in web development, and that would be adding custom fonts. There are lots of ways of doing this, lots of different best practices and opinions, but in this course, we're going to leverage the tools we've picked out just as we've done this entire time and take advantage of our tools and the ecosystems that they provide. So we'll use a Gatsby plugin to make adding fonts to our application extremely simple. So let's head on over to the plugin documentation to see how. Alright, so I'm here at gatsby.js.com/plugins/gatsby-plugin-web-font-loader. Okay, or you can just go onto the Gatsby site and search for the plugins and then search for this plugin. As it says here, this is a plugin for loading not only Google fonts, but fonts from all of these other sites as well, plus any self-hosted actual custom fonts that you may have. That's actually why I chose to use this package over the Gatsby plugin prefetch Google fonts, because I think it would be helpful for you to see how you could host your own fonts that aren't from one of these websites, and it's really convenient that it's all within this one package. So we can see here, we'll just have to npm install this package. So let's go ahead and copy that. And in our front end folder, go ahead and stop this if you had the server still running. And in the front end folder, make sure that's where you're at before you do this, npm install --save gatsby-plugin-web-font-loader. All right. So go ahead and let that install, but while that's running, I'm just going to go ahead and continue explaining how we're now going to use this. Okay, so in our Gatsby config, just like where we go for all of our Gatsby plugins, we're going to go ahead and add this plugin right here. We'll resolve the web font loader plugin, and then we'll pass it the families that we want it to fetch for us. And this will go ahead and download the Google fonts and the other fonts that you would specify and bake them into the static assets that Gatsby normally generates. Okay, so this is a pretty cool improvement because this means that your user doesn't have to wait for a request to be made once the user accesses the page for the Google font to be downloaded or the other font to be loaded. This is going to go ahead and pre-fetch those and bake that into our static files for us. So if I go ahead and open up the terminal, it looks like we've plus the Gatsby plugin web font loader. So everything was successful. So let's go ahead and copy this. We'll just copy that, even though it is pretty simple. So we'll come over now into our code editor and go into our gatsby-config.js in the front end folder. One thing I'd just like to mention here is that it's really convenient, the ecosystem of plugins that Gatsby has for us. Okay, so that's something you definitely shouldn't overlook. You should really go and check that out, especially if you're working on trying to do something in a Gatsby project that you know there's no way you're the first person to need to do. So just like loading fonts, that's such a common task that it really makes sense that other people have probably done it and made it a lot simpler. So for stuff like that, I always go and see if there's a plugin to do it for me before I do it myself. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll just come right under the Material UI plugin, right above our Strapi plugin, and go ahead and paste that in and be sure to add the comma. So now this is resolving the plugin, and then we're passing it an options object, and the first property in that object is a Google object specifying that we want to load a Google font. Okay, so if I go back here, you can see at the very bottom of this, it says for a list of all available options, consult the web font loader README. So if you go over to that, this will give you a breakdown of kind of all the different options that you have to use this. Okay, so if I scroll down here, some of the helpful examples I saw is right here actually, where it talks about loading custom fonts. Okay, so this would be a font that is not on Google Fonts or not on one of these other websites. This would be a font that you have downloaded and you have the font file itself. So to do that, it's just as easy as instead of the Google object that we use here, you use a custom object. So it's the property name custom holding an object. Okay, and then in there, it's the same families property that we'll be using, and then you would pass the URL, which points to a CSS file where you load all of your fonts. Okay, and it gives an example right here. So you would create a fonts.css, again, if you had a specific font downloaded that you need to use in your project, and then you would go ahead and in that fonts.css file, use the font face loader to define your styles. And the source, this is where you'd pass the URL to wherever your font file is. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful for you when you go to work on your own projects and to be aware of the fact that you can use this same plugin for your self-hosted fonts. All right, and then one other thing that is important to note here is this syntax right here. So in the web font config, so this is our plugin config right here, our options. So inside of there, when we're defining our families, it uses this syntax here where it specifies the font name and then a colon and then the different variants of that font that you want to grab. Okay, so N4, I4, and N7. So this corresponds to these three fonts here. My other font, that's all three of these. But the letter, so the first letter specifies the font style. Okay, so N for normal takes the first letter or the first digit, because then the number specifies the font weight, and normal font weight is also equal to 400. So they simplify this for a normal font style, and a font weight of 400 can be simplified to N4. Okay, and similarly, the font style of italic and then the font weight of normal, or 400, so italic and 400 becomes I4. And then lastly, normal and bold, which is 700. So normal and 700 becomes N7. So that's how you specify the different variants of your font. And if you scroll down even further, you can actually see another helpful example right here, where if you need to specify different subsets. So this will be helpful if you're working in other languages besides English. You'll be able to go ahead and on your Google Fonts here, where you're scrolling, this is fonts.google.com. Up here at the top, this second little drop down right here, these are all the different subsets or languages that are available. Okay, so that's how you would figure out what names to use for that. And you can go ahead and add a colon after your specified font styles and then specify the subsets. Okay, so Latin, Greek, or other languages that you might need. So let's flip back on over to the code editor, and we've got our options. We're going to be loading just Google Fonts, and so we need to pass it the correct families. So we'll get rid of those, and we could easily check by going over to our theme.js, and this is another reason it's so convenient the way we have this set up and the structure of Material UI and the styling solution in general, because we have all the fonts and the font styles that we're going to need throughout our application all right here. We had copied this all from the design file, so we know that this is all we're going to need. So we have the font family Philosopher, and then italic 700, so that's going to be Philosopher I7, and then we have Montserrat with a font weight of 300 and no specified font style. So that would mean the font style is normal. So this would be N5. Okay. And then here, Montserrat, font weight of 300. Again, no specified font style. So that would be a font style of normal. So that would be N3. Okay. I've gone ahead and checked all this already. So we can just flip on back and we'll go ahead and add the Philosopher font, and then a colon, and then I7, and then another colon, and Latin. Okay? And if you're using other languages in your own projects, that would be where you specify this, and you would do that just by adding a comma and then the other languages. Okay, but I'm just going to import Latin, and then make sure you go out of the apostrophe or single quote, and then go ahead and add the next one, which is Montserrat. Make sure you have that spelled correctly because I keep messing it up. And then we're going to specify with a colon the normal 500, normal 400, and normal 300. Okay, and all that is going to be from Latin as well. Okay, so just like that, we'll go ahead and save it in just a second. I just want to pull up. So here you can tell I've opened up the project in Safari, and we'll get more into the cross-browser support later, but it is helpful to see here that Safari does not automatically load this font. So Google Chrome, because Google Chrome would obviously have access to Google Fonts, they already load the fonts for you regardless. But in a browser like Safari, you can see that that is actually not the same. So this will be a good way to know that our plugin is working once we see the same font over here. Okay, it looks like I'm actually zoomed in here. I'll go ahead and reset that for now, just so that as we're building this out, I don't accidentally make all the styles for assuming the user is zoomed in. All right, so let's go ahead and save this. And I think since we changed our Gatsby-config, and we had it stopped anyway, so let's go ahead and npm run develop and start your front-end server back up. And of course, make sure you have your Strapi server still running also. All right, and remember, if you see this error here, the depreciation warning outgoing message, headers is depreciated, that's okay. It's not going to affect our code, so it's okay if you see that. And now we can check Safari. So we'll open that up, and it looks like that has indeed worked. So now you can see we are correctly loading the font in Safari. So we've successfully prefetched Google Fonts in our Gatsby project.